The man in the oil-stained parka pressed the muzzle of his pistol under the American engineer's jaw and smiled for the camera. It wasn't a nervous smile. It was the easy, confident smile of someone who believed he had already won. He leaned close enough that the hostages on the floor could smell the cheap tobacco on his breath and said, in careful English, "Tell your government this is just the beginning." Then he straightened, looked straight into the lens he knew was live-feeding to a satellite uplink, and raised his voice. "You like to say, we don't negotiate with terrorists." He chuckled. "Send whoever you want. Send your best. We'll be waiting." He had no idea what was already coming for him through the Arctic night. And he had absolutely no idea who was lying on her back in a vibrating helicopter somewhere over the Bering Sea, tracking wind shifts through a fogged porthole and quietly doing math in her head. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss stories like this. And drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I actually read those and I want to see how far this one travels. Now let's get into it. The helicopter felt like it was trying to shake itself apart. It bucked in the wind, metal skin booming, rotors clawing at invisible fists of air. The cabin lights were red and low, painting everyone's faces in a dim glow that made the lines around their eyes look deeper, older. Outside the tiny oval windows, there was nothing but a violent blur of white and black. Not the pretty postcard snow of a Christmas card. This was jagged snow, angry snow, a spinning wall of ice crystals driven sideways at 50 knots over the empty dark of the ocean. Senior Chief Logan Price had been in the Navy long enough to know when a pilot was earning his pay. Tonight, the pilot was earning every cent. Price sat near the rear ramp, boots planted wide on the vibrating floor, arms crossed over his plate carrier. He looked like a man refusing to acknowledge that anything short of enemy fire could bother him. 42 years old, for combat tours behind him. A silver streak in his beard he insisted wasn't gray but Frostbite's autograph. He glanced across the cabin at the officer opposite him and raised his voice over the rotor noise. "So let me get this straight, ma'am. We are flying into a freezing gale, in the dark, on Thanksgiving night, to an abandoned fuel terminal that Intel says has, what, 18 armed hostiles." Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kane didn't look up from the laminated map board in her lap. Initial estimate was 18. Her tone was absolutely calm. Last drone pass was weatherblind. Could be more. Could be less. "Outstanding," Price said. "Truly inspired planning. Can't wait to send my compliments to whoever thought, hey, let's do this with visibility measured in inches." On his left, Gunnery Sergeant Darnell Ortiz bit into a protein bar like it had personally offended him. He chewed, swallowed, and said nothing. Ortiz was like that. He had a lot of opinions, but he conserved words the way other people conserved ammo. Petty Officer First Class Ethan Cross, Team Intel and Comms, sat near the front, headset tilted, eyes flicking between his tablet and the storm outside. "The engineer they grabbed is named Mark Henson," Cross said. 48, civilian contractor, 2 kids at home in Houston. He was doing a safety inspection when these guys rolled the dock. They've already dumped 1 worker in the water to prove they're serious. Price grunted. "And that broadcast they just pushed out? Going live on 3 different platforms, mirrored 100 places in under a minute," Cross said. "Everybody's watching." Kane didn't look away from the map. She'd been a SEAL officer long enough to know there was a fine line between information and distraction. She tapped a black mark on the plastic. "Old refinery pier here," she said. "Main control building, storage tanks, living quarters, all clustered on this spit. 1 causeway in and out. Wind's our enemy and our friend. They can't run a boat in this and they can't get a chopper in either. We're the only ones flying." Price uncrossed his arms and leaned forward a little. "And we're doing this with 14 trigger pullers," he said. "Against probably more than 18 dudes with home field advantage, explosives, and media training. Feels lopsided. Which is why," Kane said, "we're not going in with 14. She touched the front of her vest where a sealed, creased envelope sat in a clear plastic sleeve. Standard for compartmentalized assignments. Open once airborne, memorize, destroy. She'd open this one 20 minutes after Wheels Up, read it twice, and then just stared at it for a full 60 seconds before folding it and sliding it back into the sleeve. Price had watched that. He was still waiting for the explanation when the rear ramp of the helicopter dropped with a hydraulic hiss and a punch of colder air rolled through the cabin. Every head turned. No one stomped up the ramp. There was no shouted introduction, no dramatic music cue. 1 second the ramp was closed. The next, it was open, and a small figure in mismatched winter gear stood outlined in the frigid dark. She stepped forward, dragging a hard black rifle case almost as tall as she was. The white-gray Arctic camouflage she wore was clearly cut for a grown adult. The sleeves swallowed her wrists. The shoulders drooped. The plate carrier looked like it belonged to somebody else. Her hood was up, balaclava tucked under her chin, only her eyes visible. Those eyes swept the cabin once. Fast, clinical, utterly calm. She couldn't have been more than 15. The noise level in the aircraft dropped to nothing. Then Logan Price started laughing. It wasn't cruel at first. It was the raw, honest laugh of a brain that had just crashed into something so unexpected it refused to process it as real. He laughed the way you laugh when you walk into your kitchen at 3 in the morning and find a horse standing by the sink. Not funny exactly, just impossible. "Oh, hell no," he said, trying to catch his breath. "No, ma'am. No. What is this?" Ortiz stopped chewing. Cross lowered his tablet an inch. 2 younger operators in the back traded glances that said entire conversations without a word. The girl ignored all of it. She stepped fully inside, hauled the ramp closed with both hands and her full body weight, dogged it shut, then moved toward an empty seat in the middle of the starboard row. She sat. She set the rifle case carefully across her knees. She pulled a pair of compact range-finding binoculars from a pouch, checked the lenses with a practiced swipe of a gloved thumb, then stowed them again. Then she turned her head and looked out the window at the storm. That was it. No introduction. No explanation. No acknowledgement that 14 grown men were staring at her like she'd just dropped in from orbit. Price leaned toward Ortiz, not quite whispering. "Is that someone's kid?" he asked. "Like, did we just pick up a base commander's niece for a morale ride-along?" Ortiz resumed chewing. "She's geared," he said. "That case isn't empty." Price looked at the case again. Long, heavy-duty, well-used. He squinted. "That a .338? he asked. Ortiz studied it. "Looks like a custom .338 Lapua. Maybe AXMC chassis. Hard to tell with it buttoned up." "That's a $15,000 rifle system," Price said. "I'm aware," Ortiz said. "On a teenager." "She doesn't look worried about it," Ortiz said, which was true. The girl had not looked at any of them since she sat down. Her jaw was set. Her eyes tracked the blizzard outside in slow, searching arcs. As if the chaos out there was a puzzle she'd already started solving. One of the younger SEALs, Petty Officer 2nd Class Tyler T.J. Jameson from North Carolina, leaned forward with unforced curiosity. "Hey!" he called over the rotors. "What's your name?" She glanced at him for exactly 1 second, then back to the storm. "Falcon 5, she said. Her voice was quieter than anyone expected. Not shy, just focused, compressed, like she'd learned somewhere along the way that words were tools and you didn't swing them around without a reason. TJ blinked. "That's a call sign," he said. "I meant your real name." "I know," she said. TJ sat back slowly. Price looked from her to Kane. "Lieutenant Commander," he said, raising his eyebrows. "You want to tell us why we've got a high schooler with a race gun on this bird?" Kane snapped the map board closed and stood. One hand braced on the overhead rail as the helicopter lurched through a gust. "Change to roster," she said, her voice going flat and official. "Falcon 5 is attached to this operation as primary long-range support. Her tasking is compartmentalized. On the ground, I own tactical decisions. She is autonomous on precision fires and threat assessment. That means if she calls a shot, it's hers. You do not countermand. You do not redirect. You do not tell her to hold unless it's a no-shoot for civilians. Her read on terrain and enemy disposition is to be treated as primary intelligence." Any confusion about that? Silence. Price lifted a hand a few inches. With respect, ma'am, he said. I want to make sure I heard you right. She is primary overwatch. Correct, Kane said. She, Price said slowly, is 15. Kane looked at him. No anger, no humor, just the steady patience of someone who had already had this argument in her own head and lost. She's your cover fire, Senior Chief, Kane said. I suggest you let her work. Price opened his mouth, closed it. He looked at Falcon 5 again, at the oversized gear and the silent eyes and the rifle case across her legs. The helicopter dropped a few feet in turbulent air. Someone grabbed a strap. Someone else muttered something under his breath. Falcon 5 did not move. She watched the storm like it was a familiar problem. Price let out a slow breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Somebody explain to me, he said softly, mostly to himself, how we ended up here. No one answered, because at that moment no one really knew. The descent started 40 minutes later. They went dark, no external lights, instruments only. The pilot's voice came over the internal comms, clipped and steady, but Price could hear the effort under it. 30 seconds to drop. Winds shifting 10 degrees starboard. Hold tight. The old offshore terminal loomed somewhere ahead, invisible in the snow. Built in the late 70s to load tankers that didn't come anymore, it was a rusting skeleton of steel and concrete jutting out into black water. The helicopter flared hard, then settled. The ramp dropped. Cold hit them like a wall. Not the kind of cold you warmed up to, the kind that climbed through gear and skin and sat directly on your bones. Kane was first out. She hit the metal deck at a jog, scanned once, then signaled. The team followed, boots thudding on frozen steel. The world shrank to the narrow strip of decking and the gray-white swirl beyond. The roar of the rotors lifted as the bird clawed back into the sky, leaving them with the smaller, meaner sound of Arctic wind. Falcon 5 came out last. Rifle case on her back now, straps cinched tight, the thing almost as long as she was tall. She stepped off the ramp, adjusted once, and fell into the rear of the left file without being told. Price watched her out of the corner of his eye as they moved. The plan was simple on paper. The causeway that connected the terminal to the mainland was their only ground route. Too exposed, too easy to mine, so they dropped on a maintenance pad cut into the sea ice. Ortiz, directly ahead of her, took 2 more strides before he realized he was alone and checked up. The halt rippled forward up the file, man by man, until Kane felt the sudden stillness and turned. Talk to me, she said. Falcon 5 didn't look at her. Her eyes were on the structure barely visible through the blowing white, the dark outline of an old loading gantry 20 meters above them. There's someone on that catwalk, she said calmly. Kane looked up. She saw metal, rust, chains crusted with ice. A guardrail. Beyond that, nothing but swirling snow and night. Negative visual, Cross murmured, scanning with his nods. I've got steel. Lots of it. That's it. Falcon 5 lifted a gloved hand and pointed. Third span from the south end, she said. See where the rail changes color? There's a section where the frost is thinner. Somebody's been leaning there. They've been there a while. The ice has built up around their boots. Price squinted. At first all he saw was gray on black. Then slowly shapes resolved. The catwalk, the rail, a section where the white looked wrong, smoother, slightly darker, like it had been disturbed and regrown. You're calling that from back here? He asked. Yes, she said. Distance? Kane asked. 290 meters, Falcon 5 said without checking. Winds blowing the plume from his breath sideways. It's faint, but it keeps reappearing in the same spot. Cross raised his tablet, toggled the thermal overlay, and held it up toward the catwalk. For 3 seconds, nothing. Then a faint, humanoid smear of orange appeared exactly where Falcon 5 had pointed. Contact, Cross said quietly. One heat signature, stationary, elevated, watching the ice. Kane's jaw tightened. Ortiz, she said. Take 2. Hook left wide. Stay below his line. Confirm and clear. Ortiz tapped 2 men. They peeled off, angling into the wind, disappearing into blowing snow. The others stayed absolutely still, boots planted in the drift, breath steaming. Price looked back at Falcon 5. She wasn't watching the catwalk anymore. Her gaze had already moved on, tracing something farther out. The faint hunched shapes of storage tanks, the black rectangles of windows. Mapping. He remembered the language in Kane's sealed orders that she'd read aloud in the bird after someone asked. Asset Falcon 5's environmental assessment and hostile disposition analysis will be treated as primary source intelligence. At the time, it had sounded like legalese. Now it sounded like they were just late to a realization someone at a desk in DC had already had. For minutes later, Ortiz came sliding back into view, snow caked on his beard. "Confirmed," he said. "1 sentry on the gantry. Or was. We took him quiet. Tripwire along the inner rail, too. We would have walked right under him." Kane looked at Falcon 5. The girl was already watching the utility ladder again. Like the question of whether they'd believe her had never actually been a question. Kane thought about the envelope, about the line that had made her read it twice. Under no circumstances will Falcon 5's threat calls be downgraded or overruled on the basis of age or rank. She'd thought it was overcautious. She was beginning to understand why it was there. "We adjust," Kane said, voice low but carrying. "We assume this entire place is rigged for early warning. Cross, update our path. We stay under steel as much as possible." The mood in the file shifted. The glances they cast at Falcon 5 weren't the same as they had been in the bird. The surprise was still there. So was the disbelief, but it was changing shape, becoming something closer to wary curiosity. Price felt something move in his chest. Just a fraction. The first hint of a very large thing starting to turn. They hit the base of the ladder 5 minutes later. The metal rungs were rimed with ice, the whole shaft a frozen throat leading up into the dark guts of the terminal. Snow whirled around the opening. The wind howled past, a steady, ongoing threat. "Same order," Kane said. "Up slow, watch the angles. Cross with me. Price, you've got rear." She hesitated, then added, "Falcon 5, middle of the stack. I want you where you can see." "Yes, ma'am," the girl said. They went up single file, boots on steel, breath loud in their own ears. The ladder vibrated under their weight. Halfway up, Falcon 5 came to a smooth, unhurried stop again. "Hold," she said quietly. The line froze. Kane twisted just enough to see her. "What do you have?" she murmured. Falcon 5 tilted her head, listening. There was nothing to hear but wind and the distant creak of steel. Then she said, "Someone opened a door on the north side of the control building 30 seconds ago. It's not closed yet." Price frowned. "You can hear that?" he asked. "No," she said. "I saw the light change." Kane waited. "Explain," she said. Falcon 5 pointed through the latticework of beams. "See the window 3 o'clock high?" she said. The reflection on the tank skin flickered. Once when the door opened, once when somebody moved through the frame. It hasn't gone solid again. That means the door's still cracked. It was such a small thing. A shimmer of light on curved metal 90 yards away, barely visible through gusting snow. Price stared at it. He saw nothing. He looked back at Falcon 5. Her eyes were steady, patient, like she had all night. Kane keyed her mic. "Cross," she said. "North side door, control building. Check it." Cross shifted his head, brought up the tablet again, and zoomed in on the building. The grainy live feed image from an orbiting drone fought through the weather just enough to show what she described. A faint wedge of lighter gray where a door was not fully shut. "Door's open," Cross confirmed. "We've got at least 1 mover inside. Possibly 2 based on heat blur." Price exhaled. A slow, careful thing. He looked down the line. Men were looking at each other differently now. Less like, "What the hell are we doing?" More like, "How much else is she going to see that we don't?" Kane nodded once. "Copy," she said. "New plan. We assume that door is our leak point. We go silent and fast. Nobody breaks silhouette unless they have to." Falcon 5. Once we hit the deck, you get to your hide and you own anything that looks our way. Yet the wind screamed, the steel rattled, and somewhere above them, in a building full of men who believed they were untouchable, a hostage sat on a chair with a gun to his head while the world watched. He had no idea there was a 15-year-old girl on a ladder in a blizzard, watching the way light moved on steel and turning that into a path that might keep him alive. They came off the ladder low. The maintenance platform they stepped onto was a narrow strip of grated steel that wrapped the underside of the old loading arms. Above them, frozen pipes as big around as trees arched overhead. To their right, 20 yards of open deck dropped away to a black, heaving ocean. The control building sat 50 meters ahead and 10 meters up, a squat, windowed box of reinforced concrete welded onto the spine of the pier. Between here and there, rusted catwalks, shadowed machinery, and a whole lot of places for people with rifles to wait. Kane held up a fist. The file rippled to a crouch. "Cross," she whispered. "Confirm hostage location." Cross tapped his tablet, eyes flicking between the shaky drone feed and the dark bulk of the structure ahead. "Top floor, center room," he said. "Thermal shows 6 heat signatures. 1 seated, hands bound. 5 mobile. That's as of 3 minutes ago. No movement since." "Entry points?" Kane asked. "West stairwell, east stairwell, roof hatch, and that north door you spotted," Cross said. "No read on interior layout. Blueprints are 40 years old and wrong half the time." "Copy," Kane said. "Ortiz, Price, you split the element. Ortiz, you're with me on the west stairs. Price, you take east. We squeeze. No shots unless they shoot first. We don't let them panic and start filming bodies." She looked over her shoulder. "Falcon 5, she said. "Hide." The girl slid the rifle case off her back. "Gantry above the pump house," she said immediately. "Gives me angle on both stair doors and the north entrance. I can't see into the control room, but I can cover anything moving around it." Kane followed her gaze. There was a narrow catwalk running along the side of a massive pump housing to their left, then up to a higher maintenance platform half-shielded by a curtain of frozen pipes. Most people would have seen clutter and ice. Falcon 5 saw lanes. Kane nodded once. "Go," she said. "Your weapons tight until we're on the building." Falcon 5 slipped away without a sound. Price watched her go, trying not to. She moved along the catwalk with an ease that made his knees ache in sympathy. Frost rimed every surface. The railings were slick. She kept one hand lightly on steel, body close to the structure, feet placing themselves in the center of each grating square like they'd done it all 1,000 times. He found himself quietly calculating how far he'd get if he tried to follow her at that speed in this weather. Answer: not far and probably not upright. "Senior Chief," Kane murmured. He dragged his eyes back. "Yes, ma'am." "Take your half," she said. "We hit on my mark." "Yes, ma'am," he said again. He signaled his element, TJ, 2 older shooters named Davis and Hall, plus Cross once he'd fed Kane the last of the data, and moved off toward the east side of the building. Wind knifed through every gap in his gear. His fingers ached even inside insulated gloves. The whole structure creaked around them like a ship 5 seconds from breaking its back. In his earpiece, Falcon 5's voice came soft and steady. Falcon 5 in position. He didn't know exactly where she'd gone. Somewhere high and half invisible, tucked under a web of pipes. He realized, with a faint twinge of discomfort, that he was relieved to hear her voice. Kane's came a beat later. "Ortiz set on west." "Price?" she asked. "East stairwell, 20 out," Price said. "I've got a door with a tiny little window that looks like it was last cleaned during the Reagan administration." "Copy," Kane said. "On my count. 3, 2, 1, move." They went. Price's boot hit the first metal step and the world narrowed to the rectangle of greasy glass at the top of the stairs. No gunfire, no shouting, just the moan of wind through broken seals. He reached the landing and flattened himself against the wall, muzzle a bare inch from the frame. Hall mirrored him on the opposite side. Davis stood just behind, ready to flood the room. Cross hung back enough to cover the hallway once they were in. Price risked a fraction of an inch of movement, just enough to get one eye on the warped glass. He saw a slice of ceiling, a flicker of motion, a boom mic on a cheap tripod. No muzzle flashes. He breathed out, keyed his mic with the thumb of his offhand. "East set," he whispered. "West set," Ortiz said from the other side of the building. "Falcon 5, Kane asked. "3 hostiles on your floor," the girl said. "2 are near the west door, 1 near the east, all focused on the hostage. 2 more below you, moving on the stairs. They heard us on the ladder. They're coming up fast." "How far?" Kane asked. 8 steps from the landing," Falcon 5 said. "West side." Kane didn't question it. "Ortiz, hold position," she said. "Price, you're about to have company from below. Falcon 5, you have a shot that doesn't risk the hostage." There was the tiniest pause. It wasn't hesitation. It was math. "Yes," Falcon 5 said. "Take it," Kane said. The rifle spoke for the first time. Even through snow and steel, Price felt the shot more than he heard it. A low, definite punch, different from their carbines. Like a big door slamming somewhere out in the dark. In his ear, Falcon 5 was already talking. "Lower stairwell," she said. "Bottom man is down." Second tripped over him. "He's on the stairs, not on his gun." Kane's voice was flat. "Price, now." Price kicked the door. It slammed inward and bounced off the stopper. The room on the other side was smaller than the drone feed had suggested. The hostage, a middle-aged man in a torn parka, sat in a swivel chair in the center, hands behind him, duct tape silver on his wrists. His face was mottled with cold and bruises. 3 men with rifles turned toward Price. 2 muzzle flashes cracked from the west doorway in nearly the same instant. Ortiz's element had breached, and the room filled with sound and motion. Price saw everything in pieces. 1 shooter near his door pivoting too slow. Another closer to the hostage trying to swing his rifle from Kane's people to Price's. The third, just behind the chair, using the hostage as a shield, pistol jammed against the man's temple, eyes wild. "Don't move!" he screamed in accented English. "Back or he dies." It would have been a standoff. It should have been. Price felt his muscles lock on instinct. You didn't take that shot in a room this small with this much adrenaline in the air. Not unless you wanted a dead civilian and a career-ending investigation. He didn't even get the chance to think it all the way. The third man's head snapped sideways as if someone had yanked his hair hard. For a half second, a fine mist hung in the air behind him. Then his knees buckled, and he dropped straight down, boneless, the pistol clattering harmlessly off the chair arm. The hostage flinched but did not fall. There was a neat, dark hole in the plaster half an inch from his ear. Price didn't have to look to know which direction that round had come from. "Hostile 3 neutralized," Falcon 5 said in his ear. "No triumph, no drama, just a status update. Room secure," Kane called over the gunfire's fading echo. It was true. The 2 men near the west door were down, crumpled in expanding pools of red on the gray concrete. The one by Price's door lay half in, half out of the threshold where Hall had dropped him. The hostage was breathing fast, chest heaving, eyes too wide. Price stepped around the bodies, grabbed the back of the man's chair, and spun it. "Henson?" he asked. The man blinked, focus snapping onto Price's face. "Yeah," he said, voice raw. "Yeah." "Congratulations," Price said. "You're late to Thanksgiving, but you're still on the guest list." He lowered his rifle just enough to yank a knife free and cut the tape. Henson's hands came forward, stiff and chafed. He flexed them once, winced, and then gripped the chair arms like the only solid things he could trust. "Any injuries?" Kane asked. "Nothing that can't yell at me later," Henson muttered. Price almost smiled. Almost. Then Falcon 5's voice came in again, sharper than before. "Commander," she said, "we have a problem." Kane, halfway through ordering Cross to get Henson moving, froze. "Talk," she said. "Your intel package said 18 hostiles," Falcon 5 said. "I'm looking at least 30, maybe more." "How?" Kane demanded. "They're in the tank farm," Falcon 5 said. East and south sides. Multiple squad-sized elements moving to surround the pier. And there's a machine gun on the south gantry pointed right at your exit route that does not exist on your map. Kane's stomach went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. Confirm, she said. South gantry, elevation 10 meters, hard cover to the rear, Falcon 5 said. Her voice was still level, but there was a new tightness in it, like the string of a bow pulled back another inch. Crew served, probably 12.7 or 14.5. Field of fire covers the entire main pier, including the route to the causeway. Anyone running that deck is going to get turned into confetti. Price stepped to the control room window and risked a quick glance down. All he saw was swirling snow and the faint ghost of the pier lights cutting through it. No clear shapes, no visible muzzle. Falcon 5, he said. You're calling a heavy gun through a whiteout with no light and 30-knot wind. Yes, Senior Chief, she said. You sure you're not just seeing ghosts? He asked. There was a beat of silence. Then, the drift pattern on the deck under the south gantry is different, she said. Snow's blown clean in a 3-foot arc in front of the rail from muzzle blast. The icicles on the support beam above. Easy, Henson, Price said. Long night's not over yet. In Price's ear, Falcon 5 was still working. Hostiles in the tank farm are shifting, she said. One element is moving toward the causeway, probably to cut off the route they think you'll use. Another is spreading along the south edge. They don't know about the trench. They'll know as soon as we pop out the other end, Ortiz muttered. Then we don't pop our heads up until we're ready to move, Kane said. They moved. The corridor from the control room to the pump house was a narrow steel throat lined with ancient wiring and pipes that hummed with the ghosts of long empty fuel lines. Henson stumbled once, then caught himself, jaw set. The pump house itself was a forest of valves, shadow, and sweating steel. Their breath clouded the air in front of them. Falcon 5's voice cut in again. 8 hostiles on your level now, she said. 4 moving toward the control room you just left. 4 toward the stairwell below you. They're closing the net. How much time? Kane asked. 2 minutes before they find the bodies, Falcon 5 said. Less if they're running. Then we're not here when they do, Kane said. She found what she was looking for at the far side of the pump house. A row of inset steel plates, each the size of a coffin lid, rimmed with ice. She kicked at the nearest one. It didn't move. Hall, she said. Hall stepped forward, jammed the tip of his rifle under the plate's lip, and levered. Metal shrieked. Ice cracked. The grate came up an inch, then 6, revealing blackness and the smell of old fuel and cold water. Davis, you're first, Kane said. Single file. Watch your footing. If you drop, call it loud and we fish you out. Davis slung his rifle tight and disappeared into the dark. One by one, they followed. Boots hit narrow metal ledges inside the trench. It was barely shoulder width, with heavy pipes running the length of it at thigh height. The ceiling, the underside of the deck, pressed low over their heads. Price eased Henson down between him and TJ, steadying the man as he felt for footing he couldn't see. Above them, muffled by steel and snow, came the faint, distant crack of doors opening. Shouted orders in a language Henson didn't understand but the tone of which he absolutely recognized. They're in the control room, Falcon 5 said quietly. They're not happy. How long until they look out the window and see we're gone? Ortiz asked. They'll assume you went for the causeway first, Falcon 5 said. They'll adjust when they don't see you in the kill zone. How long? Price asked. A half-second pause. Math again. 45 seconds, she said. 1 minute, max. Kane's voice was a low, urgent thread in the dark. Move, she said. No stops, no chatter. We come out behind those tanks and go straight off the pier onto the ice. Falcon 5, you see anyone moving to cut that route, you tell me before they know they're doing it. Yes, ma'am, the girl said. They moved. The trench forced them into a crouch that made thighs burn and backs complain. Pipes crowded knees. Every step was a careful placement to avoid twisted ankles and missed footing. Price could hear Henson's breath in front of him, sharp in and outs more from adrenaline than exertion. He could also hear, faint but real, the low, distinctive cough of a heavy machine gun testing its arc above them. The sound came from ahead and left. Falcon 5 spoke over it. "They're walking the main pier with the gun," she said. "Short bursts. They don't understand why they're not seeing you." "Let's keep it that way," Kane said. 20 meters. 30. The trench curved gently right, following the fuel lines toward the tank manifold. The air got colder. The metal under Price's hands felt like it would rip the skin off if he stayed in contact too long. Falcon 5 again. 3 hostiles just took position at the tank corners near your exit point, she said. "They're setting up to watch the ice. No machine gun, but they're covering the only flat path." "Options?" Kane asked. "I can take 2 of them before they know what's happening," Falcon 5 said. "The third will dive for cover. He'll be yours." Kane didn't hesitate. "When we're 10 meters from the exit, you fire," she said. "We use your shots as our go signal." "Understood," Falcon 5 said. They kept moving. The trench ended in another steel grate. Ortiz and Hall shouldered it up from below this time, metal rasping against ice. Snow smell flooded in, clean and sharp. 10 meters, Cross whispered. Falcon 5's voice was almost conversational. "Left target is smoking," she said. "He's leaning weight on his right leg. It'll take him longer to move. Taking him first." The rifle spoke. The sound came from above and behind, a single surgical report that cut through the storm. "Left is down," she said a heartbeat later. "Right is stunned. Middle's going for cover." The second shot came before she finished the sentence. "Right is down," she said. "Middle is yours." Kane's voice snapped like a whip. "Up!" They burst from the trench like rounds from a barrel. Snow came up to Price's calves. The cold hit his face like a slap. Ahead of him, a man in a black jacket was halfway through the motion of dropping behind a concrete tank pedestal, eyes wide with the dawning realization that things were not going according to plan. Hall hit him before he finished the thought, 3 controlled shots stitching him across the chest and dropping him into the drift. "Clear!" Hall shouted. For half a second, the tank farm was eerily still. Then the world lit up. Rounds started hammering the pier from 3 different directions as fighters in the farm realized their prey was somewhere they hadn't expected. Muzzle flashes strobed from between tanks and along catwalks. "Move!" Kane shouted. Off the pier onto the ice. Falcon 5, suppress south and east. "Working," she said. Her rifle answered. Price didn't see the men she was hitting. He saw the absence instead. The way one stream of tracers from the south gantry faltered, then stopped entirely. The way another position's fire jerked sideways and went silent. They scrambled down a rusted ladder bolted to the side of the pier, boots hitting rough, frozen sea. The ice groaned under their combined weight but held. "Keep spread," Price barked. "Nobody bunch up. Henson, you stay between me and Ortiz. If you fall, yell." "Trust me," Henson said through clenched teeth. "You'll hear it." Above them, the machine gun they couldn't see finally found them. It opened up with a sound like someone ripping a sheet of the world in half. The first burst tore through the air 2 meters behind the tail end of the file, chewing the ice into a spray of white and black. "Down!" Kane roared. They hit the ice. Bullets hammered the surface where they'd just been, throwing up shards of frozen sea like shrapnel. "Falcon 5, Kane snapped. "That gun." There was no immediate answer. 3 seconds. For Price realized, with a small, unpleasant jolt, that this was the first time tonight the girl hadn't replied inside a beat. When her voice came, it was different. Not panicked, but tighter. "It's partially deflated," she said. "They put sandbags around the mount. I only have a slice of the gunner's head and 1 shoulder from this angle. If I miss, they're going to hose your position blind." "Can you move?" Kane asked. "Yes," Falcon 5 said. "But if I do, I lose eyes on the East group. They'll be able to rush you on the ice. So if you stay, you're in a bad angle with a big gun," Price said. "If you move, we get overrun." "Yes." There was a very brief pause. "Stay or move is your call," Kane said. "Your safety comes first. That's not negotiable." Another pause. Then, "I'm staying," she said. Price shut his eyes for exactly one heartbeat out on that ice, then opened them again. The heavy gun's second burst chewed the far edge of the ice field into Swiss cheese. Closer now, their ranging bracket tightening. "Falcon 5, Kane said. "You've got one shot." "I know," the girl said. The machine gun fired again. A sustained burst, walking its way toward where the team lay pressed against frozen ocean. Halfway through the burst, there was a sharp, distinct crack from above. The heavy gun faltered midstream as if someone had flicked a switch. The last few rounds dribbled out wildly into the dark. Then there was nothing. "Gunner's down," Falcon 5 said. "Loader's trying to figure out what just happened. He's on his knees. He's not back on the trigger in time." "Then we're gone before he learns," Kane said. "Up and move. Straight to the extraction grid. Pilot has 8 minutes in this weather before he's out of options." They ran. Henson's bad leg tried to betray him twice. Each time, Price had a hand on his collar before he fully started to go down, jerking him back into stride. Rifle fire cracked from the tank farm above. Falcon 5 hit every muzzle that dared show itself, her shots an invisible hand knocking down threats the team hadn't even fully registered yet. "For down on the ridge," she reported, breath a little harder now. "3 more shifting right. They're trying to get an angle on your egress. 30 meters to your 9 o'clock. One of them's got optics." "Can you?" Kane started. "Already on him," Falcon 5 said. The crack of her rifle rolled again. "Optics is down," she said. 5 more hostiles unaccounted for. None of them between you and the LZ. The lights of the waiting helicopter were a blurry halo in the snow ahead, rotors already spinning, the bird hovering just above the ice to avoid settling weight on uncertain sea. "Last 50, Price shouted. "Nobody slows, nobody looks back." They didn't. They piled into the bird one after another, hands reaching to drag Henson in between them. Kane did a head count in 3 seconds flat. 14 plus 1, she yelled at the crew chief. "Punch it!" The helicopter heaved itself up and away. The ice and pier dropped away beneath them, swallowed once more by white. Only when they were 50 feet up and angling hard for the mainland did Price realize someone was missing. "Where's the kid?" he barked. As if on cue, the crew chief grabbed the overhead handle and leaned out, peering down through the open ramp. "There!" he shouted. Through the storm, Price caught a glimpse of a small figure sprinting across the ice from the shadows of the tank farm, rifle case on her back, head down into the wind. She should not have been fast. She was. The pilot eased the bird sideways, keeping the ramp just 50 yards ahead of her. 30 seconds, the crew chief yelled. "That's what I've got." Falcon 5 closed the distance like the cold and the weight weren't even there. She hit the ramp at a full run, boots skidding on metal, hands grabbing for the nearest fixed object. Price and Ortiz both lunged forward, each catching an arm and hauling her the last foot into the cabin. The crew chief slapped the ramp switch. Steel rose. The Arctic fell away. Falcon 5 ended up on her back on the deck for a second, chest heaving, balaclava askew. Her rifle case lay across her legs again in almost exactly the same position it had occupied on the way in, like some strange bookend. She pushed herself upright, adjusted the strap, and looked out the tiny window at the shrinking shape of the doomed terminal. In the red light of the cabin, every man's eyes were on her. She ignored them. Price watched her for a long moment. Then, quietly, he said, "Somebody needs to tell me who taught you to shoot like that." No one answered, because that answer hadn't been cleared for this flight. Not yet. The ride back was silent in the way a room gets silent after something almost breaks and then doesn't. The rotors hammered above them. The wind still shoved the airframe around. But inside the cabin, the noise felt distant, like it was happening to someone else. Mark Henson sat strapped near the forward bulkhead, oxygen mask on his face, eyes open and fixed on nothing. Cross stayed beside him, checking his pulse, murmuring reassurance he didn't really need but gave anyway because it helped. Ortiz had his eyes closed, head tipped back against the wall, not sleeping, just letting adrenaline drain. TJ stared at his gloves like he was trying to find the moment his life almost ended somewhere in the seams. And Logan Price sat across from Falcon 5, watching her do what she'd been doing all night. Look out the window and say nothing. He realized the urge to speak to her wasn't about curiosity anymore. It was about the thing he kept replaying in his head, his own laughter on the helicopter. That laugh felt different now. It felt heavier. The bird hit a pocket of turbulence and the cabin lurched. A couple of men grabbed straps. Falcon 5 barely shifted. Price finally broke and leaned forward. "Falcon 5, he said, keeping his voice low. "That head shot on the guy behind the hostage. You took that through a window across a deck in a storm." She didn't look at him. "Yes," she said. "How far?" he asked. She paused just long enough to be sure he wanted the real answer. 206 meters, she said. Angle was downhill. Wind was right to left, 9 knots average. Price blinked. "You measured wind in that mess?" "I watched the snow," she said. Of course she did. Price sat back. He had a daughter at home who was 15. A sophomore. Soccer. Braces. Complained that the Wi-Fi was slow. The thought didn't land softly. He looked at the rifle case across Falcon 5's knees like it was an object from a different world. Kane stood near the front, braced against the frame as the helicopter fought its way toward the lights of the base. She didn't look back, but she spoke into the cabin like she knew exactly what was happening behind her. "You all did well," she said. "Intel was a mess. We adapted. Package is alive. Nobody got left. That is a win." Nobody answered. They were too busy being alive. When the skids finally kissed the tarmac, the base didn't feel like relief. It felt like a different kind of pressure. A line of vehicles waited with amber lights flashing. Medical was moving before the rotors even slowed. People with clipboards ran in practiced chaos. A major in a parka argued with someone who outranked him, and someone who outranked both of them argued with the weather. Henson was the first out, lifted onto a stretcher, still talking through the oxygen mask as if he had to convince himself that his voice still worked. Price stepped down onto the tarmac and the cold hit him again, clean and sharp. Falcon 5 came off last, still in gear that didn't fit, still carrying a rifle case that looked like it belonged to a full-grown man. Base personnel saw her and did the same double-take Price had done. One airman actually froze mid-step, mouth open, watching her walk past like he'd just seen a ghost in snow camo. She didn't react. She followed Kane and the team into the debrief building and sat in the back corner without being told. The first debrief was quick and ugly. Kane stood at the front with Cross beside her, going over the timeline in clipped, controlled sentences. Wrong hostile estimate. Undocumented heavy weapon emplacement. Multiple additional elements moving in from the tank farm. Attempted encirclement. Successful extraction of civilian package. No friendly casualties. And threaded through all of it, though nobody said her name in the official portion, was Falcon 5, sitting in the back corner like a shadow that didn't belong on paper. Price watched her while the questions flew. She didn't fidget, didn't shift, didn't look around the room to see if people were looking at her. She just waited. When the formal debrief ended, Kane dismissed the team. "Get food," she said. "Get eyes shut if you can. We'll do the deeper AR at 1400. Men stood, but nobody left. It was subtle at first. Boots that didn't move toward the door, shoulders that didn't relax. The strange collective pause of people who knew something was unresolved but didn't quite know who had the right to resolve it. Kane understood. She reached into her parka and pulled out a second envelope. Not the one she'd had on the helicopter. This one was newer, crisp, handed to her on the tarmac by a pale intelligence officer who'd appeared like he'd been waiting all night. Kane looked down at it for a long moment before she broke the seal. Then she read it, twice. Then she folded it with care and looked up at her team. "I owe you some context," she said. The room went dead still. Falcon 5 didn't move. It was like she'd known this moment would come and had already decided she wouldn't help it along. Kane's voice stayed even. "Falcon 5's name is Riley Mercer," she said. The name meant nothing to most of them. Just a normal American name that didn't belong in a story with machine guns and storm insertions. Then Ortiz's eyes narrowed slightly, like something in his memory had just shifted. "Mercer," he said quietly, almost to himself. Price turned. Ortiz was staring at Falcon 5, not with suspicion, something closer to recognition. "Master Chief Caleb Mercer," Ortiz said. "DevGru sniper instructor. Here outside Mosul. Went back for a pinned element alone. Drew fire so they could pull their wounded out." The room absorbed that. Kane nodded once. 7 years ago," she said. Price's mind did the math without permission. 7 years ago, Riley Mercer would have been 8. TJ's mouth opened and closed. "He taught her," TJ said, not quite a question. "Yes," Kane said. "He spent the last years of his life training her. Not as a hobby, not as a game, as preparation." Price heard his own voice come out rougher than he expected. "Why?" he asked. Kane looked at him. "Because he knew he wasn't coming back forever," she said. "And because he believed the world doesn't get safer just because your kid is young." Riley, Falcon 5, kept her eyes on her hands. Jaw set, not hiding emotion exactly, holding it, like a weight she'd been carrying so long it had reshaped the way she stood. Kane cleared her throat and continued. "What I can tell you, and what you're cleared to know, is that Riley has been deployed in support capacity before," Kane said. "People above my pay grade signed off on it. Tonight was not a gamble." Price stared at the girl in the corner. 15 years old. Autonomous on precision fires. Primary intelligence. He thought about the way she called the sentry on the gantry by frost pattern and breath plume. The machine gun by drift arc and icicle length. The open door by a reflection on tank skin. That wasn't talent. That was a language. A language somebody had drilled into her until it lived in her bones. The room stayed quiet longer than normal. Then Price stood up. Not dramatically, not for attention, just because he couldn't sit there another second with the words stuck in his throat. He walked to the back corner, stopped in front of Riley Mercer. She looked up at him. Her eyes were steady, tired now but steady. Price swallowed. "I laughed at you," he said. She held his gaze. "I know," she said. "I'm sorry," Price said, the words scraping on the way out. "Not because you proved anything. Just because I didn't even try to understand what I was looking at." Riley considered him for a moment. Then she said, "My dad used to say the best operators aren't the ones who are always right. They're the ones who update when the facts change." A beat. "You updated," she said. Price felt something in his chest loosen that he hadn't known was tight. He nodded once, held out his hand. Riley looked at it like it was a serious thing because to her, apparently, everything was serious. Then she shook it. Firm grip. No theatrics. Just acknowledgement. Price stepped back. And that's when TJ stood. Then Hall. Then Davis. Then Cross after checking Henson one last time and handing him off to medical. One by one, the team moved to the back corner. Not because anyone ordered it. Because something in the room needed to be made right. A line formed. A line of hardened operators waiting to shake the hand of a 15-year-old girl in oversized winter gear. Riley stood and shook each hand the same way she'd shaken Price's. With economy. With complete presence. Like she understood what it cost each of them to do it. Ortiz, when it was his turn, leaned in slightly and said something only she could hear. Whatever it was, the tightness in her jaw flickered, just for a second. Not a smile. Not exactly. Something softer. When the last hand had been shaken, Kane cleared her throat. "There's one more thing," she said. The room quieted again. Kane looked down at the second envelope in her hand, then up at the team, then finally toward Riley. "The man you saw on that live stream," Kane said. "The one with the pistol and the camera. His name is Farid Qasim." Price felt the air shift. Ortiz's eyes narrowed. Cross went still. Kane continued. "We believed he was on the terminal during the raid," she said. "He wasn't. Post-op assessment confirms he left approximately 90 minutes before we inserted." "Meaning he knew," Ortiz said flatly. Kane nodded once. Yes, she said, meaning he knew, and meaning he's out there right now, moving, while he still thinks we're catching our breath. She looked at the intelligence officer standing in the doorway, the thin man with the tablet who hadn't sat down once. The officer spoke. We've got a possible location, he said. A remote pump station 12 kilometers inland. Thermal indicates 6 to 9 bodies. Vehicle activity within the last hour. Price didn't speak. He didn't have to. He looked around the room. These men were wrecked, cold, running on fumes, and not one of them looked like they were going to let Farid Qasim walk away. Kane asked the question anyway because it mattered that it was asked. We have 1 hour to resupply, she said. Anyone who needs to sit out will not be judged, will not be recorded. She waited. 3 seconds. Nobody moved. Nobody blinked wrong. Kane nodded. Gear up, she said. We lift at 0630. Riley Mercer bent, picked up her rifle case, and walked toward the supply cage without waiting for directions. Price watched her go. He thought about his daughters again. Thought about what it would take to raise a kid who could do what she'd done on that pier. Not just the shooting, the composure, the willingness to be alone in the storm and still do the work. He didn't have a clean answer, but he knew one thing. Farid Qasim had laughed into a camera and dared America to send its best. And if he thought the best always looked like a grown man with a beard and a 1,000-yard stare, he was about to learn something. The hour went fast. Refit never feels like enough time when you're coming off one fight and heading back into another. It felt even shorter with the knowledge that the man they were going after now wasn't just some lieutenant with a YouTube channel. Farid Qasim had directed bombings in 3 countries without ever leaving his safe house. He'd turned a decaying fuel terminal into a stage. He'd put a pistol under an American's jaw and told the world to send its best. Now he was 12 kilometers inland, in a low, ugly building on the tundra, convinced he'd slipped the noose. Price grabbed more ammo than doctrine called for and less than he wanted. Fresh batteries. A second tourniquet for no particular reason except that he'd needed a second once and hadn't had it. He found Riley Mercer in the armory, kneeling by her open rifle case. Up close, her rifle looked like something out of a catalog he couldn't afford. Long, skeletonized chassis, precision barrel, scope with more adjustment than some artillery pieces he'd seen. She was stripping it with quick, practiced movements, fingers moving on instinct while her eyes tracked the torque wrench, the threads, the glass. How's the gun? Price asked. She didn't startle. She just finished seating the bolt, checked it with a practiced motion and said, It's good. I meant you, he said. She considered that for a beat, then set the rifle gently back in its foam. I'm okay, she said. Tired. Not done. Price couldn't argue with that. Same, he said. He hesitated. Your father, he said. Mercer. I knew the name. Didn't know the rest. Riley's hands paused on the case latches. He didn't talk about home on deployment, she said quietly. He said home stays home. That was the rule. Good rule, Price said. Mostly, she said. It meant he didn't bring the war into the house. It also meant he ran out of time to say some of the things he thought he had time to say. She closed the case. He taught me the rest with what he'd already done, she said. Price didn't have anything to add to that wouldn't sound small. So he just nodded and stepped back as she lifted the case onto her shoulder like it weighed nothing. The helicopter lifted out into a bruised, pre-dawn sky. The storm was tapering now, wind down to something that only tried to shove the bird sideways every other minute instead of every second. Visibility was better, 200 meters in places, maybe more over the tundra. Different ground this time. No deck, no water on 3 sides, just flat, snow-covered earth and a low brown smear on the horizon where the pump station squatted. Kane stood at the front of the cabin again, hand on the rail. Pump station Theta is a single building, she said. Cinder block, flat roof, 2 trucks parked outside. 1 auxiliary shed 20 meters east. No towers. No high ground except this. She tapped the map. A shallow rise maybe 800 meters north of the station. It didn't look like much on the satellite shot. A wrinkle in the land. To whoever drew this, that's just terrain, Kane said. To Mercer, that's Overwatch. Riley, at the rear again, glanced at the image once. The rise has a shallow draw behind it, she said. It'll keep me out of sight until I'm in position. From the crest, I can see the front door, both trucks, and the east shed. I won't see the back wall, but I'll catch anything that tries to run for the road. Price looked from the map to the window. The tundra below was a white table under a steel sky. He imagined being 800 meters away on your belly in that, trying to hold a scope steady on a man you'd never met but had seen threaten your country. He couldn't decide if that sounded like punishment or purpose. Maybe both. Kane finished the brief. Intel says 6 to 9 hostiles, she said. We're assuming that's wrong again. We'll treat every dark window and every drift as if it has a rifle behind it. Objective is capture. I want Qasim alive if we can get him that way. She looked straight at Riley. Same rules, she said. Autonomous on precision fire. But we do not put a round through his head unless there is absolutely no other option. Understood. Yes, ma'am, Riley said. Price felt the bird flare as the pilot called over the net. 60 seconds. Winds mild, visibility fair. I'll set you down behind that rise. They went out into a quieter kind of cold. No screaming wind. Just the deep, indifferent chill of early morning on open ground. The pump station was a low rectangle half a mile away, painted a color that had once been white or maybe beige before weather and time had their say. 2 trucks, 1 pickup, 1 panel van, sat in front, both with snow in their wool wells. Weak yellow light leaked from a few narrow windows. The landscape around it looked empty. Price didn't believe in empty landscapes anymore. Ortiz, Price, same elements, Kane said. We move on the building from the west. Riley. Already moving, Riley said. She peeled off left, a small figure against the vast field, rifle case bouncing lightly against her back. Within 20 seconds, she dipped into a shallow depression and vanished from casual sight. They moved. The snow here was thinner than on the pier, scoured by the earlier storm. Their boots punched through a crust to hard ground every few steps. Breath steamed. Weapons stayed low but ready. Riley's voice came through their earpieces 6 minutes later. Mercer in position, she said. I have eyes on both vehicles. Main door, east shed. Hostiles? Kane asked. 2 at the door, smoking, Riley said. 3 inside the main room. 1 pacing. 2 sitting. 1 in the east shed. Heat signature in the back room is different, larger heat plume, less movement. That's your guy. Explain, Cross said quietly. He's not doing anything, Riley said. Everyone else has a pattern. Walk, sit, stand gesture. His heat is big and steady. He's seated, probably behind a desk or at a table. People who think they're in charge sit while everyone else moves. Price almost smiled despite himself. Intel said 9 max, Kane said. You're calling? 8 confirmed visuals, Riley said. Possibly 1 more in a blind spot on the south wall. No roof sentries. No obvious heavy weapons outside. Traps? Kane asked. Another small pause. There are tire chains laid out behind the pickup. Not on the tires, Riley said. They're iced over, so they've been there since before the last squall. There are also fresh tracks leading away from the back door to the tree line. 1 set is deeper. Someone carrying weight. Could be a cache, Cross murmured, or a trail to an alternate exfil route. Kane thought for a half second. We assume both, she said. Ortiz, you take left side and the east shed. Price, you take right. Cross, you stay on me. We hit the front fast. Mercer, you own anything that comes out that door without a blindfold or a white flag. Yes, ma'am, Riley said. They were 100 meters out when the front door opened. A man stepped into the threshold, jacket unzipped, rifle slung lazily over one shoulder. He took 2 drags off his cigarette, exhaled into the morning. Then his head turned. Too sharp, too fast. He wasn't just stretching his neck. He was listening. Riley spoke calmly. Front sentry heard something, she said. Probably our rotor wash earlier. He's alert now. If he looks another 10 degrees right, He'll see you. Can you take him before he makes the call? Kane asked. Yes, Riley said. But the man behind him will register it. You'll lose surprise at the door. Kane weighed the options in the space of half a breath. Price, she said. Hold at 90. Ortiz same. Mercer, stand by to drop both on my go if we're burned. If not, we're at the door before he finishes that cigarette. They angled slightly, using a low hummock for cover, boots whispering on crusted snow. For a moment it looked like it would work. Then the sentry's radio crackled audibly in the still air. He tilted his head, frowned, said something in a language Price didn't speak, and his eyes came up, right at them. Kane didn't wait. Mercer, she snapped. Now. The first shot hit the sentry high in the chest center mass and snapped him backward into the doorway. The second took the man behind him as he lunged forward, round punching through his sternum and into the door frame, splintering wood and brick. 2 down at the door, Riley said. 1 hostile just stood up from the table in the main room. He's on the move. Move! Kane shouted. They ran. The pickup's hood loomed to their right. The van squatted to the left. The air in front of the station filled with dust and the smell of old exhaust as their boots pounded the packed snow. Price hit the doorway low, shoulder first, stepping over the bodies Riley had just made. Inside was chaos. The room was small, like the control room at the terminal, but warmer and close with the stink of unwashed bodies and cheap fuel. A table in the center. A map on the wall. A camera on a tripod in the corner, still pointed at a now empty chair. 3 men were on their feet, guns half up and mouths open. One reached for the camera instead of his rifle. Ortiz's element took the left, Price's took the right. It was loud for 6 seconds. Then it wasn't. Front room clear, Kane called. Mercer. There was no need to ask. I have 2 hostiles at the back door, Riley said. One is stepping outside with a bag. The other is covering him. They're arguing. The one with the bag wants to go. The other doesn't. Bag? Cross asked sharply. Long, narrow, heavy, Riley said. Could be weapons. Could be explosives. Price's neck prickled. Farid? Kane asked. No, Riley said. These 2 move like workers. Farid's bigger heat is still seated in the back room. He hasn't stood up. Ortiz, Kane said. You've got the shed and the back door. Price with me. Cross on the back room. Mercer, if that bag moves more than 5 steps from the door, you turn it into confetti. Yes, ma'am, Riley said. They pushed through a narrow hall that smelled of cheap cooking oil and damp concrete. Price could hear voices now, raised, sharp. He couldn't make out words, but he could hear the shape of an argument. Fear, command, resistance. He saw the back door as Ortiz shouldered through from the opposite side of the building, flanking the 2 men Riley had on glass. One of the men spun toward Ortiz, rifle up. The other tightened his grip on the bag straps and took a step away. Riley's shot hit the bag. It didn't just punch through fabric. It detonated whatever was inside with a flat, hard whomp that slapped the air. Shrapnel ripped sideways, shredding the man's arms from the elbow down. He screamed and dropped what was left of the bag, falling backward into the snow. The second man flinched, head snapping toward the blast. Ortiz took him clean in the chest. Bag is no longer a problem, Riley said evenly. Whatever it was, it's not going anywhere. Copy, Kane said. Back room. The door to the back room was heavier than the others. Reinforced, scuffed by boots. Cross had his tablet out, thermal up. 1 body seated behind that desk, he said. 2 more against the back wall. 1 on each side. Hostages? Price asked. Cross shook his head. No, he said. Guns. They're ready. Kane nodded to Price. Same as before, she said. You take handle, I take center. On you. Price felt the familiar narrowing of his world. Door. Wall. His own breathing. Somewhere 800 meters away, a 15-year-old girl was watching a room she couldn't see, mapping positions on instinct and heat. He hoped like hell she was wrong about as few things in the next 10 seconds as she had been in the last 10 hours. He kicked. The door slammed inward. For a heartbeat, time slowed. Farid Qasim sat behind a battered wooden desk, exactly like Riley had said. Bigger build, broad shoulders, neatly trimmed gray-streaked beard, pistol lying near his hand, not in it. Laptop open in front of him, still playing a muted feed of the terminal they'd just left behind. On either side of the small room, pressed against the back wall, two men stood with rifles half up, already moving to get angles past the doorway. Farid's eyes went to Kane, not to the rifle, to the rank tabs on her chest. He smiled. Of course he did. He reached not for the pistol, for something under the desk. Price saw the movement. So did Riley. "Device under the desk," she said sharply in their ears. "Left hand. Trigger, not gun. Can you hit it?" Kane snapped, not breaking stride as she moved into the room. "No," Riley said. "Too much wood. I can't see it. I can hit his arm." The two gunmen at the walls were raising their weapons. They were closer. They were immediate. No one would have blamed Riley if she'd gone for them first. She didn't. Her shot punched through the thin cinder block wall at a shallow angle, coming in from above and behind Farid's left shoulder. It hit his forearm just below the wrist. Bone shattered. Meat exploded. The thing he was reaching for under the desk stayed under the desk. Farid screamed. He didn't grab the device again. Kane and Price took the wall men almost together, two sets of controlled pairs that turned them into slack shapes sliding down paint. "Clear!" Price yelled, though his heart was still hammering. Farid slumped sideways in his chair, clutching the ragged stump of his arm. Blood sheeted across the desk and dripped onto the floor. The pistol sat untouched. The laptop feed continued to play, a looping broadcast of his own face from 3 hours ago, still telling the world to send its best. Kane moved fast. She kicked the pistol away, yanked Farid's good arm behind him, and snapped flex cuffs around both wrists, even though one now lacked the structures to make the restraint useful. "Farid Qasim," she said evenly. "You're in U.S. custody." He spit at her. The glob fell short, hitting the toe of her boot. He said something in Arabic. Ortiz, stepping into the doorway, translated without inflection. "He says you should have killed him live," Ortiz said. "He says now you'll have to listen to him talk." Riley's voice came through the earpiece. "He thought dying on camera would make him a martyr," she said. "He doesn't know how small he looks right now." No one answered. They didn't have to. They had work to do. "Mercer," Kane said. "Status outside?" "Two hostiles on the tree line behind the station," Riley said. "They heard the explosion. They're not moving yet. They're waiting to see what this is. One on your east side between the sheds. He's backing away. Slowly. He's going to run in about 5 seconds." "Can you stop him?" Kane asked. "Yes," Riley said. The rifle cracked. "East side is down," she said. "Two in the trees just turned. They're running west, not toward you. They're trying to disappear." "Let them," Kane said. "We've got the head. The tail can spend the rest of its life looking over its shoulder." Price grabbed Farid under the good arm and hauled him out of the chair. He was heavier than he looked. Blood dripped from the wreck of his forearm, hot against Price's cold gloves. "You got any more surprises under this desk?" Price asked conversationally. Farid glared. "I will see you again," he said in English, thick with an accent. "In your cities. In your—" Price yanked him forward hard enough to cut the sentence off. "Yeah," Price said. "I'll pencil that in and see if it fits my schedule." They moved him, out of the back room, down the short hall, past the bodies of his men, past the dead man at the front door whose chest Riley had remodeled from 800 meters away. Outside, the morning was brighter. The horizon had gone from iron gray to something closer to steel blue. The air felt a few degrees less lethal. The helicopter's rotor beats came in from the distance, growing louder. "Mercer," Kane said. "Any more?" "One more in the shed," Riley said. "He's shaking. He hasn't moved in 30 seconds. He's not coming out." "Not our priority," Kane said. "We're done here. All elements, move to pick up grid." They started across the snow toward the smoke-colored helicopter shape settling in a swirl of powder. Price kept Fard close, one hand on the back of his neck, guiding him. Halfway there, the man stumbled and nearly went to his knees. Price held him up without thinking about it. He didn't want to be that guy in the footage if someone somewhere was still streaming. Riley's voice came in one last time. "Hostiles in the tree line just disappeared into a ravine," she said. "No sight, no shots. You're clear to the bird." For the first time since they'd left the base the night before, Kane let a fraction of tension out of her shoulders. "Copy," she said. "Mercer, you're done. Pack it up and get to extraction." "Yes, ma'am," Riley said. Price looked up toward the low rise as they walked. He couldn't see her, just a darker patch of snow on the crest where she'd laid all this time. He'd been in enough fights to know what that meant. The people you didn't see were the ones you really owed. They loaded Farid into the helicopter first, cuffed and bleeding and furious. Then the rest of the team. Riley came in second to last again, case on her back. She moved like she'd dropped 1,000 years in the last 10 minutes, but still steady. Price watched her climb the ramp, boots leaving small, neat prints in the tracked snow. The crew chief yanked the ramp up. The pilot hauled them into the air. The pump station grew small and then vanished in the white. They were halfway back when Ortiz said, almost idly, "You know she hit 3 outside the station and 9 on the pier, right?" Price looked at him. "3 here," Ortiz repeated. "Door pair and the runner. 9 out there if you count the gunner, the bag, and the ridge group you never even saw." He nodded toward Riley. 12, Ortiz said. 12 men who don't get to shoot at anybody else. And we're all still breathing because of every one of those rounds. Price let that number sit in the cabin for a moment. 12. He looked at Riley. She wasn't looking back. She was watching the horizon, where the first pale strip of sunrise was burnishing the edge of the world. He thought about the way Farid had smiled in that back room before he'd reached for the trigger. He thought about the way Riley had put a round through his arm instead of his skull. He thought about a kid in a living room somewhere, feet on a coffee table, watching the news and seeing Farid's face in handcuffs instead of behind a martyr's montage. He thought, that's the difference between killing and winning. Back at the base, everything after felt too bright. The medical bay lights were harsh. The debrief room was warmer than it needed to be. Coffee tasted like someone had made it at midnight and forgotten it. The second debrief was longer. Paperwork always is, when you bring back a name that's been on a board for years. Kane walked them through both operations in detail this time. Flags on intel failures, flags on tactical adaptations. Still, officially, Riley was a ghost. Her contributions went into a separate channel, classified differently, filed away where fewer eyes would see them. Unofficially, she was the axis everything had turned on. When the questions were finally exhausted and the last slide of the last PowerPoint gave up the ghost, Kane dismissed them for real. "Go eat," she said. "Go shower. At some point in the next 24 hours, sleep." That's an order. Men stood more slowly this time. Bodies were tired. Brains more so. Riley was the last to move. She picked up her rifle case, walked out into the hallway, and leaned briefly against a stretch of bare wall, eyes closed. Not asleep, just recharging. Kane found her there. "You did exceptional work," Kane said. "Both targets. You know that." "Yes, ma'am," Riley said quietly. Kane hesitated. "The shot on his arm," she said. "Under the desk. You were sure?" Riley thought about it. "No," she said. "Not absolutely. But my dad drilled those shots for years. He said the hardest shot you'll ever take is the one where the thing you're protecting is closer to your bullet than the thing you're trying to stop." Kane nodded slowly. "He was right," she said. Riley's mouth quirked a fraction. "He usually was," she said. "Except about one thing." Kane waited. "He thought he had more time," Riley said simply. "To show me things. To explain why he did it the way he did. He used to say, 'We'll work that shot when you're older,' or 'You don't need to carry that yet.' And then one day he ran out of days and there were still things on the list." She opened her eyes. "So I'm learning the rest while I go," she said. There wasn't an answer to that didn't sound small. Kane reached into her pocket instead, pulled out a small, circular piece of cloth. The team's unofficial patch. A stylized trident over a strip of ice with a single star above it. The kind of emblem no one outside the unit would recognize, but that everyone inside would die before they let someone else wear. She held it out. "From all of us," she said. Ortiz's idea. Unanimous vote before I even finished the sentence. Riley looked at it like it was heavy. Then she took it, closed her fingers around the cloth. Her jaw tightened just a fraction. "Thank you," she said. There was no tremor in her voice, but something in her eyes said everything else. Kane nodded once. "Get some sleep," she said. "The world is not getting any simpler while you rest. But it'll be waiting. We need you clear when it calls again." Riley slipped the patch into a pocket over her heart, picked up her rifle case, walked down the hall toward the exit and the pale morning outside. Price was waiting just beyond the door, leaning against a pillar with a paper cup of terrible coffee and a folded photograph in his pocket of two girls who lived in a safer world than Riley ever had. He fell into step beside her without saying anything at first. They walked across the tarmac together, breath making small clouds in the air. Finally, he said, "My girls are about your age." She didn't ask. He didn't offer more. Then he said, "Your father would be proud of what you did out there." She kept walking for 3 more paces. Then she said, "I know." She didn't say it like a teenager faking confidence. She said it like fact, like math, like wind and drop and distance. "He gave me everything he had," she said. "Tonight I used all of it. I didn't waste any of it. That's the only way I know how to say thank you." They reached the edge of the ramp where the concrete met the snow. Riley stopped, looked out toward the line of low, distant hills that framed the base. Beyond them lay a rusting terminal, a pump station, and a scattering of fresh graves the snow would soon cover. Price followed her gaze. The world looked the same as it had the day before. Gray sky, white ground, hangars and towers and antennae jutting up like teeth. It didn't care about what they'd done. The world never does. But 14 men and 1 contractor were alive who might not have been. Farid Qasim was in a cell instead of on a poster. And a 15-year-old sniper who had once been just a kid in her father's backyard with a .22 and 2 big hearing protection had put 12 dangerous men into the ground and kept an entire platoon from joining them. People would keep judging what they saw first. They always had. They always would. They'd see a small girl in a jacket that didn't quite fit and decide what she couldn't be. They wouldn't see the hours on the range, the years of watching wind and light, the patient voice of a father explaining, again, that the bullet doesn't care about your feelings, only your math. They wouldn't see the nights alone on a cold ridge, stomach against rock, waiting so other people could move. They would just see the surface, the laugh, the doubt, the dismissive glance. Skill doesn't argue with that. It doesn't get louder or flashier or stop to explain itself to people who haven't earned the explanation. It does what Riley Mercer had done in the storm and on the pier and on that low, freezing hill above Pump Station Theta. It goes to work, quietly, precisely, again and again, until the people who laughed are alive enough to apologize. Price took a sip of bad coffee and made a face. Riley looked at him, just for a second, and the corner of her mouth twitched. Then she walked on, across the snow toward the barracks, rifle case on her back, patch over her heart. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The men she'd saved would. For a long time, they'd remember the laugh on the helicopter. They'd remember the crack of 1 rifle in a blizzard. They'd remember the way a ghost on a hill saw what they didn't and turned 12 enemies into 12 problems they never had to solve the hard way. And the next time someone asked them if they believed a 15-year-old could be the best shot in the unit, they'd answer without laughing. Because they'd already updated. And once you've seen what the work looks like up close, you don't forget. You carry it. The way Riley Mercer carried her father's lessons. Straight into the cold. Straight through the storm. Straight onto the ridge.